Welcome to the Indie Opera Podcast.
Welcome to the Indie Opera Podcast. This is Peter.
This is Walker.
This is Ashley Renee.
This is Chuck off camera.
Yes, Chuck off camera, and welcome to the Indie Opera Podcast. Today we are joined by Lawrence Brownlee, a leading figure in opera, both as a singer on the world's top stages and as a voice for activism and diversity in the industry. And Michael Spyres, one of the most sought-after tenors in his generation with 8 DVDs and 25 CDs to his name. He has been celebrated on the world's most prestigious international opera houses, festivals, and concert halls. Our guests will be coming together to sing a Rossini concert at the 92nd Street Y, Wednesday, October 27th, with Myra Huang at the piano. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi there. Thank you.
How you doing, Mike?
Nice to be with you.
And Lawrence, may we call you Larry?
Please, that is my legal birth name. So yes, please call me Larry.
So how have you two been doing during COVID and this whole thing? I know our lives have all changed. And so tell us, what has it been like in this new world for you guys?
Well, I'll go ahead and go first. The interesting thing was both of us, we've seen each other a couple of times since then and actually had a couple of concerts since the outbreak of COVID. But for me, it was very interesting. It was the first time in 23 years that I actually spent more than, I'd say, 2 months in secession in the United States. And I was a full 6 months at home. And obviously, it was a very different thing being at home and having to adapt to being on American soil for such a long time after 20 years, to be honest. Just it was an adjustment for everyone. But the odd thing for me is that it was impossible to take extra work because not all of the jobs, just like many other singers, just fell all at once. I had 8 operas and 10 concerts that just fell week after week. It was cancel and then another cancel. So I still had to do all the work, memorize all of the pieces, do everything, get ready for all the operas mentally. Then, oh, sorry, we're not doing it. And by the way, we're not going to pay you. That's how most of them went. Some of them were good, but I ended up doing construction work actually for a couple of months for a friend of mine, because I used to be a construction worker, doing the tamping and sometimes jackhammer work and also planting and doing things with my hands. I mean, if I wasn't a singer, that's probably what I would do, to be honest, is construction and landscaping. So yeah, it's been an interesting time.
That's
oh my
amazing.
Gosh.
God, I'm gonna look at construction workers completely differently now. I mean,
well, I got a lot of flack for it because I would say back when I was 20 years old doing construction, I was like, yeah, I'm an opera singer, and they're like, no, you're not. You're just listening to opera on your headphones and you're working the jackhammer. So get back to work. And I'm like, oh, you'll see someday.
So you sang some Nessun Dorma for them, and
yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's an interesting way into the profession, starting out with construction. But yeah, I'm so grateful that Larry and I have both had the chance in the last few months to do a couple of gigs together. And we had I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Larry, we had four concerts that were lined up, and then they all fell through with the coronavirus, obviously, and with the album that came out. We had four different countries that we were traveling around to, and they all fell through. So fortunately, we were able to get some of those back in the last couple of months, and we sang our program in Ravello in Italy. That was fantastic, and also in Philadelphia just recently. So yeah, and Larry can tell you on his end how it's been for him.
Larry.
Yeah, it's been interesting because COVID made everyone shift gears. I am a person for the last 30 years, like Michael, that has been traveling internationally. And I remember that I said to my wife, I said, this will be the first year that I don't go to Europe. And that is so strange for me. And so I actually had something that like popped up at the last minute that kept me in the habit of going to Europe for, in my 30 years. So I had something that I had to do in Munich, and then a couple other things came onto my calendar. But what I said about it shifting everyone's mind and who we are, I actually started doing some other things, doing some more virtual projects, doing some more advising, some consulting. We're not only opera singers. I know Michael, he is the artistic director, I believe, of a company, or is it the general director? I don't know. Artistic director of a company in Springfield, Missouri. And so with him wearing that hat and myself doing some advising and also doing a ton of master classes and virtual performances, it shifted kind of what I have been doing as far as like being on the road. I've been active in other ways. And it's kind of reinvented me. I've reinvented myself, and just actually more than that, just showing other things that I'm capable of doing, things that I enjoy doing. Also spending the time at home with my wife and kids. Yes, we both do have wives and kids. And so that it was nice to kind of change that, and just be around more and just get a chance to spend time with our family. So happy to say that I stayed active like Michael did through the COVID times. And so now that we're little by little starting to get going again, it's nice to do that again.
So tell me, how did you two meet? How do you know each other?
Well, we met initially, I think it was, back in 2007 or 2008, I believe.
Bad
Wildbad in Germany. But I had known about him, right when I was starting out and turning into a tenor. Larry had just won the Met auditions, and and I had this voice teacher who said, you're going to be a tenor someday. And I was like, I would listen. I heard Larry on television with the Met, and I was like, I'm never going to be able to be a tenor like that. So I don't see what you're talking about. There's no way. But that's initially, I was enamored with the singing, and then we knew of each other for quite a long time. And then I was singing Otello, Rossini's Otello in Bad Wildbad in Germany while you were recording. What was that, Larry? I can't remember.
The Italian Girl in Algiers.
Okay. Yeah. And we met at a barbecue, and actually me and my brother, who was also he's a character tenor, he was there, and we all had a barbecue and talked shop, about being a tenor, and we'd always just kind of kept in touch every once in a while, admired each other, and you can take it from here, Larry.
No, I mean, just like Michael said, we met in Germany years ago, but it's interesting. I had known Michael, I had known of his work, and like he said, he had done the larger part of what he was doing in his career. He was all over in Europe and was doing so many things, recordings and rare operas, and just so many interesting things that our paths never seemed to cross. And so I guess we admired each other from afar. And it was one of those things that in the back of my mind, I hope we get a chance to work together, because Michael is that rare voice, probably the rarest of anything that you can find. Maybe that other than a real basso profundo, he's a bari-tenor, which is a real different type of tenor that you can't find. And so for the type of voice that I have, and knowing the great works that Rossini composed, I thought, wouldn't it be great to be able to do something with Michael, because I think our voices will complement one another. Also, you have the great tradition of American tenors who sing the bel canto Rossini repertoire. You have the great, of course, Rockwell Blake, Chris Merritt, Bruce Ford, Gregory Kunde, Richard Croft, There's so many, have now John Osborne and Rene Barbera, of course, and you have such a strong tradition in that. And we thought, wouldn't it be great to continue that tradition? And so what happened is we got an opportunity to do a concert together for the first time in 2018, I believe it was 2018 or 17 in the Concertgebouw. And we just hit it off so well. And so that was the beginning of our performing relationship together.
So it's an all Rossini concert.
Absolutely. Well, yeah.
And tell us a little bit, how did exactly this concert come about? Did it was done at Opera Philadelphia first, or did you approach them, or how did that work?
Well, Opera Philadelphia has been a part of Michael and I. Our album, we did Amici E Rivali. And so since they were such a important support system for that, we felt like doing the American debut. We're not necessarily doing the Amici E Rivali concert, but it is an all Rossini concert that Michael and I are going to do for the 92nd Street Y.
Potrò reprimere come tenere sposa la fiamma ch'io nel sen. Gioco d'amor, questa è la pace d'amor, non sa, il suo da palpiti, sempre maggior si fa. Sempre maggior si fa, sempre maggior si fa, maggior si
And so that album kind of fueled more interest in people wanting to do our concert. And again, this is not per se the Amici E Rivali as it is on the CD, but it's an all Rossini concert that is kind of grown out of our album that we did together. That Opera Philadelphia, which I serve as an artistic advisor, they were very helpful in helping us put together the resources and everything else to make that possible. So yes, that happened first. And so this will be the New York, I guess, debut of a Rossini type program with Michael and myself.
Pardon me. No, and the reason that we conceived it as being an all Rossini concert is because both of us owe our careers, relatively speaking, to Rossini, and a lot of people still are discovering how ingenious and inventive and truly he was a trailblazer for the human voice. And that a lot of people don't realize is that once he came onto the scene, everything changed in opera. And we, as we said, we want to give tribute to the great American Rossini tradition, but also to let people discover a different side of Rossini, because most people still think only of Barbiere di Sevilla or Cenerentola. And they don't know that he was just as well known for his serious works as he was for his comical ones. And he really changed the entirety of opera once he came onto the scene. And we're going to be giving a mixture of flavors and different arias from his comical and his serious Rossini period. And I think it'll be interesting because a lot of people don't realize is that when you hear Rossini from beginning to end, he sounds like many different composers, and that's because he was so ingenious, and he really revolutionized the opera world. And Verdi, even though people don't want to admit it, but Wagner, Verdi, Donizetti, Bellini, all of these people were influenced by Rossini, and this is why we want to bring more and more awareness to Rossini and to show people that at large that he was truly maestro.
So are there issues when you're programming this now that we're in the post Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement? Are there issues that come up with programming where you need to be sensitive and edit certain pieces? Oh, we can't do that. He's being completely out of the box there. I know that it's affected a lot of people and what they program. Have you taken that into consideration in this on the 92nd Street Y concert? Has it affected it at all?
Not directly. You know, it's interesting because some of the things that Rossini has written, I shouldn't be allowed to sing, I guess, if that's what you would say. For example, the role of Otello should be sung by someone who is the Moor, the darker complected person. And the character of Rodrigo should be sung by someone who has a European origin as far or background. And what we're doing here is changing that because the voice, I felt this a long time, and I've been told this my whole career. It should be the voice that leads what a person sings. And so basically my voice should be singing the role of Rodrigo, and Rodrigo should be the white guy, if you want to put it that way, and the black guy should be Otello, and we've switched it. But I always say this, we have to look at things now with the eyes or the perspective of 2021. Some of these composers wrote things in times were different. And yes, there are some situations where male domination and racism and anti-Semitism or some of these other things were a part of the history. And I feel like the works are still worthy and should be performed, but I think you have to introduce ways to produce these and present these that are thoughtful and respectful, and then really take out of it if there's some things that are derogatory, that are hateful, which I haven't necessarily found yet. But I think if you have to do that, I think we should have enough artistic license that we can change some things, if it's just the way things are said. I think that should happen. But I think these works are worthy and should be presented. But no, I haven't found anything that we've had to change or alter for our performance at the 92nd Street Y, because I think the music is, should speak for itself.
If people are afraid to program something because it might be upsetting, not necessarily, like you said, if it's overtly and blatantly wrong now, it's difficult to program it. But with the Rossini and within context, everything needs to be talked about. When you actually shy away from a subject, you act like it didn't happen. And if you decide to say that, we better not talk about that subject nowadays, then you're acting like it never existed and it still doesn't exist. So if you're afraid of a topic, that's usually grounds to go further into it and try to explore why that's an incendiary topic. And there's ways to go about it and ways to talk about things. And an open dialogue is one of the best ways. And especially with Rossini and what Laria just said, I think that's it is brilliant that it automatically people think, well, Otello needs to be a certain way. And no, that's why opera is one of the most amazing art forms, is that it gives you the license and the freedom. And actually, historically, you need to realize that Rossini actually changed the story of Otello. There's a story in 1001 Nights that he based his Shakespeare on. Then Rossini took the Shakespearean version and changed it himself, and he specifically changed the tenses and the way that people say more within the opera to mean the Moors, which was a mixture of Arab and African and European people during that period, and specifically in Rossini's Otello. It was a family from Italy. Didn't necessarily have to be Otello the Moor. There's lots of controversy around things, but you need to talk about them openly and try to get to the bottom of things and have open dialogue, as Larry and I constantly do. And more people need to be talking about these things and trying to understand but not shying away from subjects.
But I know there's like two sides to it. There's the casting idea, and then there's the idea of the composer being woke, and whether they are coming from a place that's offensive or not. So it's probably easier, I would say, if you're doing a concert versus doing a staged performance to do because once you stage something, it becomes even more apparent.
Well, do you find that in Europe they would be more open to casting choices like that, or do you find that companies in the States would be hesitant to go that far?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest, it's one of the biggest reasons Rossini's Otello is not done is not because of the racial issue. It's because it's really difficult to find the singers to do it. To be honest, so it's not come up very often. But the great thing is that Larry, Larry and I have talked about it, and hopefully recording it someday. But I don't see them being much different than the US. I mean, from my perspective of being more open and more progressive, I mean, everyone's trying. Maybe some people are pushing the envelope more, but I don't see that being more enlightened and more open. I think you see more people in the US really pushing that envelope and opening the door more. And I think we need to be more proud about our opera companies in the U.S. Trying to talk about the social and racial issues. And I think it's a good thing, and not shy away from things. You can't hide your head in the sand and act like things don't happen,
Yeah, and it's true that when you go back and research, what it was like at that time, it's actually much more complex than just black and white. There's so many different, like you said, there were Arabic people involved, or even people from Southern Europe, could be considered, Moors.
Oh, of course.
And also I agree with you. Just having the conversation with the public, just having a public conversation is just such a hugely important. And I know they're doing that at Portland Opera with some, and it made a huge difference.
Another thing I think we need to understand is that we in America have a unique history. And we have a history that's different than other places. So some of the conversations that need to be had in America don't need to be had in some of these European countries. And the thing is, you'll talk to some of these people, they don't understand racism the way we know racism that is alive and well, that's living and breathing even today. Even some Black people that come to the United States, people from Barbados or people who come from France or England, they don't have the history of the intensity or the directness of racism that we as African Americans know, that we live on a day-to-day basis. So when you have a discussion with the stage director from Europe about programming Otello, it's not that they're insensitive, but they don't have the history behind it. They don't have the other things that we know. They may have heard of Jim Crow, but they don't know what Jim Crow is. I mean, I have relatives who know what Jim Crow is. My father would tell me all the time. He said, when I was a kid, I remember walking down the streets and I couldn't look at a white person in the face. My mother, who was a grown woman, she couldn't look at a child in the face. And so we have that unique history of racism, and that stuff, the repercussions or the remnants is a better word of racism still exists. So if you talk about people being woke today and people wanting to make sure that certain things are not done with the mindset of wanting to be respectful, that's a different discussion because it's so new. If you think of the fact that even now, I mean, of course, our current problems notwithstanding, we still have all of those things in our society. But I mean, again, I know older people in their 70s and 80s who still say colored. They still say the word colored, and they still have other things that for them, that they're not meaning to be offensive, but that's just the way it was. And so here now, I think I appreciate people being woke, not to the point of we don't do. I appreciate people being woke, of taking on this discussion, taking on this idea. Let's try to find a way to make this work. I think we should have creative directors and planners and other people who can take a story like Othello and take a story where that was meant to be to focus on someone else's race and say, let's try to find a way to make this meaningful with creative ideas and creative methods to make the story still talk. Because the fact of the matter is, no one questions when we put up Madame Butterfly. How often is the person a 14-year-old Asian geisha looking person? It usually is not, but people make, exceptions for that. And so for these works that need to be done, I think we can find creative ways to say, okay, it doesn't have to be this person needs to be black or white. Let's find a way to make the story work, because we need to understand, of course, I said the history and what we deal with in our society, but try to find a way that's creative to make sure that these things can be put on stage, I think.
I was gonna say, Peter, you're hogging all the questions. So.
I know, because I have lots of questions. Go ahead.
No, but it just makes me just think, in hearing both you and Michael and Larry speak, it just sort of makes me think about the calling to not just sing, but to have something to say, whether it's thinking about activism or thinking about your role in arts administration and actually shaping some of these conversations. And I'm just curious about, and it's specifically about activism, but I'd love, Michael, for you to even talk about it. But where did this kind of conversation fall in the scope of your priorities when you were even starting your careers? Was there a call for activism, and how's that kind of evolved, or a call for leadership, and how's that?
Activism, it's one of those things that a lot of times you feel like you're called to do something. I remember my father said that, sometimes your leadership abilities will call you out, or actually will pull you or put you into a position of being active or being a mentor. I think Charles Barkley, the great Hall of Famer basketball player, said he never grew up wanting to be a role model, but because of his success, he was, and people called upon him on various things, his opinion of things, or just for him to be involved, because you saw a person who took his situation and made the best possible outcome with what he had. And so activism for me is basically providing opportunities, filling in the gap, standing in the breach for those who need the help, who need the space. I realized that people did it for me. I realized that if you have this platform to be an effective conversationalist or activist with what you've done, then you should. Sometimes, I think it doesn't take a lot from you to make a lot of impact for someone. Sometimes some people just want your presence or your words. And so for me, I'm happy to offer it when I can. So I am active. I believe in paying it forward. I believe in wanting to provide opportunities for young African-American singers or young Hispanic singers or young American singers because of the things I've been fortunate to do. And I realize that with any time when someone thinks about building their legacy, and that's not what I'm always thinking about, but I feel like sometimes when you build your legacy is what you do for others. And I think one light that illuminates another one brings more light. So the more people's lives that you can touch, the more people that you can help, the more people that you can expose, the more time you have to lend an ear or be that person to listen or to guide or to help someone who you've inspired. When people come up to me or Michael and say, I listened to you on the internet and I bought a ticket to come across the globe. As someone just said to us when we did our concert in Philadelphia, we came from France because we couldn't miss this concert. People are touched by what we do. So for us to help others, to be a light, to be a guide, to be an assistance to some of those people and be active and to speak from our hearts on issues that are important to us, that is something that I really take very, very seriously and responsibly because I think it makes a lot of difference and it helps a lot of people.
Bravo. Well, I grew up in a very different way than most of the people that I grew up within. I'm from the Ozarks in one of the poorest regions of the United States, and my mother actually grew up. She was back and forth back in the 40s and the 50s. My mother and my grandmother was a single grandmother and a bartender, which a barmaid for for 40 years. And my mother grew up in the projects in California, in the barrios, and she was homeless many times of her life, and especially her childhood. And some of the greatest comfort and love that she found was extended family, because she didn't have that in actual physical blood form, but she found it in community, found it within the Black community, found it within the Latino community. And my mother and my uncle specifically, my uncle was one of the very first, actually in Missouri, he was the first diversity coordinator back in the early 90s for the University of Missouri. And it was his mission after a crazy life, to help integrate people within society. And so he started an initiative to go into prisons and teach people computer skills in prisons, and to teach computers to every poor person that he could. And I think I marched in a gay pride parade when I was 5 with my family, and my family has always been the musical, weird, different kind of family in a small town of about 1,500 people. So any of the outcasts, they came to our house. But my mom and dad were two of the most, and they are two of the most generous and open people. And they always taught me every single day that I could do anything that I want in my life, but the most important is to treat others kindly and to give other people the opportunity to flourish in life, because a lot of people don't have the same love that you're getting. So that's been from day one with me, and especially throughout my childhood. We grew up extremely poor, but opera and music was always within our lives. And so when I decided to go into to opera, it was it was a long road, and I didn't know where it was going to end up. But the amazing thing is that I about 6 years ago, I think it was 6 years ago now, the opera company that I started out with, it was at the time called Springfield Regional Opera. We've since changed our name to the Ozarks Lyric Opera, because we want to expand and be a much bigger region than just one specific city. But one of the biggest things that we did and started to do in my tenure as the artistic director was to take our opera, no matter what, to the public schools, and especially for the poorest of our communities. And we were able to create original operas and take them to people and try to change young kids' lives. And we've been doing some mentoring, trying to get people more and more into opera that normally wouldn't. And for me, it's my whole life. It's not me saying I'm an activist. That's just what my life is and always has been. And the same thing with Larry. It's you have to walk the walk, and all of the time. And for me, that's it's through action and not just words.
Have you gotten a lot of good feedback from taking music to those schools and those areas? I mean, how does that affect people when you perform for them? I mean, kids who have never heard opera before, or never imagined what it could be.
Well, that's the great thing is to help younger kids discover what opera is. They think it's just you standing and singing as loud as you can, but if you can bring it to their language, it can really touch and bring that third eye open and make people completely change. I said I come from a very musical family. My sister's a Broadway singer, and she was actually in Carousel with Renee Fleming right before the whole pandemic. And it's and my brother, also an opera singer. He's the COO of the opera company, because I'm always on the road, and he basically keeps the opera running. He and my other great staff. But that's kind of at the forefront of trying to change people's lives through opera.
I want to get back to Ashley Renee's point about activism, and also Larry's point about having these discussions. I I'm curious on how we have these discussions because people are coming to the production. Maybe they're not coming to a talk back. How do we have these discussions? What forum does an opera company have other than a talk back at before a show? How do we actually do that? Because a lot of people are just going to come to the show and still maybe get the wrong messages or even loaded messages. How does that discussion happen? And are there companies doing it well that we should know about?
I think a good way to do this is to engage the artist in conversation. And this is something that I've done before in a few talks at Opera Philadelphia, where we've had an opportunity for people to have a conversation before the opera happens or before the concert happens. It's kind of like a town hall where people can come in and we've had moderators that kind of guide the discussion, where you have myself and some of my other colleagues. For example, I did a song cycle called Cycle of My Being. And Cycles of My Being, after the concert, we actually sat on stage and talked for about an hour and a half. And people from the audience got a chance to hear from our mouths and our perspectives and to talk about various things. You know, it was 6 gentlemen sitting on stage, 6 African-American gentlemen on stage. And we had just done a song cycle that talked about hate and love and talked about racism and asked questions like, why do you hate me? And all these other things. And so when you get a chance to hear it from, for the lack of a better word right now, the horse's mouth, or directly from us and our unique experiences, to be able to talk to these things where you have people in that space where they just experience something or they are going to come and experience something, I think this is very, very helpful. So how do we do it in a way that we can affect more people and it's not something that doesn't ripple the water? You know, you do something like this and the impact seems so small. I think myself and some of these other people and some of the conversation that I've been trying to have in, you know, the shows that I've been doing online, we breach these subjects. We broach these subjects. We talk about these, and we want people to have an understanding and to engage in conversation. Another thing that I have been doing is I've been like moderating book clubs. So I have a book club that we discuss specifically racism. And we talk about people. And so I get the opportunity when people in my industry, because that's a large part of the people that come and to talk about some of these various issues. And we discuss Black Lives Matter, and we discuss the inequities in casting and the lack of faces and opportunities for people of color that don't get a chance to be the general director, and or people who seem to get they come into a management agency and they're on the fast track. And before you know it, they're an artist manager. And then some other people can't be, aren't in on the discussion and they don't get the opportunities. All these things are constantly a part of our world. I think it starts with artists like myself, some of my other friends and colleagues who have been vocal, who've been on here, online talking about various issues, to be able to talk about this, and then pushing or encouraging our friends and our colleagues who are leaders of organizations, who are the general directors that we went to graduate school with, or we sang in the opera with before they became this person, to push them and to talk to them and challenge them to not pay it lip service, but to be active and be committed to making those changes. So how do we do it? I think that's the best way to do it, to engage artists with people in positions, people who get this platform to do something, and then to make sure that we as artists push them to be committed to making this change that we want to see. I think that this is the best way.
Well, part of that seems to be, you were talking about a program that was specifically dealing with racism, but when you're actually performing pieces that are, not new works, but older works, how do we engage the conversation so that people watching the older works that are really inherently racist and sexist and whatever, who are not going to come to the talk back? I know sometimes I've seen a few companies sort of position their advertising to make it clear that there's a discussion going on here, but not everyone who goes to the show is going to be able to engage in that and might get different messages. Do we need to change staging? What do we do?
I was just kind of pulling out some of your answers already, and it was making me already think and some of the ways that you're talking is not saying doing just talkbacks, right? So it's
Not
going out. I'm thinking about like Afton Battle down in Fort Worth that like loads up a flatbed and goes out into the community, right? Because that's a
Mhm,
part of the whole equity conversation is some people can't get into your doors to get to the talkback in the first place.
mhm.
So, Michael going out into the schools is a part of that too, like engaging youth that also engage their parents and like
Mhm.
so it sounds like I'm pulling out already some of the answers that Larry was giving. Book clubs, Kiki conversations online. Like I'm
Yeah,
thinking
sit
of
down
all
with
of the
LB.
things,
Yeah,
right? The sit down with LB and just all of the different. So thinking outside of the talkback model, right? Like, what are some other models to
It
explore?
is, it is, and let me just add this, and I can give the floor to Michael. I think that there's a lot of things that need to be done, but I also say that it's a company-wide thing. It's also the marketing. And I have told the people at Opera Philadelphia, I say, you can't market to the suburbs the way you market to the urban cities. I mean, the urban part of the city, because that it's falling on deaf ears and it feels like it doesn't appeal to everyone. But it should be a thing that when we're seeing these shows that you say are maybe inherently racist, why don't we make the cast so diverse that it can't be a part of the discussion? If you see an all-white cast and that's talking about something that is potentially racist, then people are going to look at it through the eyes or the scope of it being potentially racist. But if you have an African American on stage with an Asian American, with a Latino American, and an Indian person, and you're talking just about a story, that story becomes less racist because it's inclusive. So it needs to be done in casting. It needs to be in company wide rooms where everybody in the building is so diverse that racism or the idea of racism can't be a part of the discussion because you see it from the top down that the idea of that company is to make sure that we have an environment on and off stage that is inclusive and inviting for everyone.
yeah, that is so. I've seen very few productions like that, and they are so exciting. I mean, that's happening more in theater as well, like the Oregon Shakespeare Company. They're starting to do more of that, and ART. And it's true. It just lifts the conversation to a different level, but it also raises the humanity and complexity of it all. And yeah, so I think that invites more people to take part. Because they don't feel as excluded.
How do you feel the industry is doing right now dealing with this? I hear a lot of talk, and there actually seems to be some programming, some innovative programming starting, but I think there are a few sort of key companies that are doing it well. Is the whole industry moving in that direction? What do you see as a trend right now?
Yes, it's progressing. It's not as progressing as fast as many people would like, because there's still so much groundwork to lay. And a lot of it is through advocacy in younger students, getting them and getting other communities into the idea of opera. I mean, to give you an idea, even when I started 23 years ago, I was a young artist at Opera Theater St. Louis. I was one of maybe 40 singers, and I would say two of them were from underprivileged families, and I was one of them. And that's a big problem. A lot of people don't have access, or they don't have the ability to get into opera because it's still unfortunately seen as an elitist art form. And there's a lot of groundwork still to be laid that people can go into this, and you don't, and especially with the internet now, you can if you have a passion for opera, you can discover it, and it's this awareness of another world that needs to start happening, and it is starting to happen, but it's only because some of these communities are now seeing this on YouTube, and seeing this, for instance, this huge situation that's happening with Fire Shut Up in My Bones and at the Met. It's now reaching into some communities, and they're like, oh, you mean opera's for Black people too? And you're like, yes, it's for everyone. But that's the wonderful thing, is that it is happening. The only way that you can really, really get it into communities is by starting kids young and getting kids into it from a very young age, and getting into the communities, that going out into the communities.
It also sounds like you mentioned Terence Blanchard's opera that's about to go up, which I'm like, whoop whoop, New Orleans.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm so excited. And Will
Yes.
Liverman, oh,
Right, Will. I love Will. But it just makes me think about, and I know that we talked about how you can thoughtfully program some of these, some of the older works and the war horses and the classics, and reshape thinking around them.
yeah,
Yeah, but it's also, I think it is also something to point to telling more diverse stories, and also more diverse sound within opera, like keeping I mean, like, Larry, I'm just thinking about like the genre bending that you do, which I personally appreciate, and just thinking about diversity in that way, diversity of stories, diversity of sound, diversity of just sort of style evolution, even thinking of it that way. And I'm just curious to just hear you speak about that. And Larry, just, like, I'm just such a fan when you like go from like Rossini to like some kind of crazy gospel riff and back and forth. Like, and like, just talk to us about that, please.
Well, the wonderful thing about, if we talk about African Americans, and we have some of the greatest names in opera, of course, the great Leontine Price, Grace Bumbry, Martina Arroyo, Simon Estes, just great. A lot of those traditions started in the church. And so when you think of Terence Blanchard and some of these other singers, other composers, they were influenced greatly by jazz and gospel and other things too. And so when we talk about expanding this art form and allowing it to grow, I think we have to invite more sounds, as you said, more realities, more traditions. When you see Fire Shut Up in My Bones, and I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen some of the clips, people are dancing and people are exuberant and jubilant and happy. And those things, it's interesting now that we are beginning to program other things. And I think it's grown out of course, some of the social issues that have affected our society. So many of my friends, when I talked about the book club that I moderated, that I began, it grew out of a lot of my friends who, when they saw the George Floyd thing that happened in 2019 or whatever it was, they came to me and said, wow, I didn't know. Oh my gosh, it seemed like they were ready to see and to know and to understand the culture that is Black culture. We've known in the pop industry that a lot of people have benefited from the Black culture for many, many, many years. But in the opera world, there was a desire to do the war horses, like you said. Let's just do Traviata and Aida and Marriage of Figaro and all these other things. And anything outside of that was an outlier. People didn't want to see it or appreciate it. But now, if you get the discussion to talk about, people did Moby Dick and they did Dead Man Walking. Why not do Fire Shut Up in My Bones? Why not do Malcolm X? Why not do something where we begin to tell the full story of the United States, or especially in an American company like the Metropolitan Opera, Lyric Opera Chicago, and these other things? Why not do something that is specifically unique to our country? So yes, because people are, being more enlightened and want to see about our culture, and hopefully many of us have been talking about this, it seems like, it's already started to dissipate, where people are like, okay, I'm over it now, that we got through that whole, George Floyd thing. We're beyond that. Let's just go back to the way things were. I don't want to do that. I'm glad that the Metropolitan Opera said, we're going to now do Malcolm X, which was done many, 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 many years ago. And it hasn't been done much since. Now that they're taking it and that people are seeing this, the importance in understanding and really seeing the Black experience, or really understanding about our culture and stuff like that in a way that's appreciated. Appreciated is so important. And so when you see me break into the runs and the riffs, it's because that's in me. That's what I knew. That was my musical foundation. And I think by doing this, it enhances what we do. It enhances what opera is, because guess what? These people who sing Fire Shut Up in My Bones, Will Liverman, who's like my little brother, that is my, Will and I are very, very close friends. Will can sing Fire Shut Up in My Bones, but he can also sing one of the best Figaros. He can also sing one of the best Con Almavivas. I heard him sing Chonard, and I thought he should have been singing Marcello, because he has that ability, but he has the other ability to break away and do something that is meaningful and representative of our culture. So I like to see it. I always try to do it. I always try to show that that's a part of who I am. And I hope we get the opportunity in more spaces to be able to present this so people can appreciate our art form even more.
Can I ask you about your book club, so that people listening, what books, what books
Yes.
have you covered, and how can people find out a little bit about it? What books are you reading as a group?
So we have read, we read White Fragility. We read the book White Rage. We read the book Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon by Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. We also read the book Cast. We're reading the book now, Talking with Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And then we're also doing the book by Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates. And so all these, it's been great to be the moderator and to talk about this, but to learn so much myself. I have learned a lot by doing this, and a lot of my friends have written me and write me constantly saying, thank you for the space to talk. Thank you for the opportunity to ask questions. I'll be forthcoming and transparent and tell you that I don't really have a Black friend, not anyone that I can have this discussion with. And for me, I'm not their conduit. I mean, I'm not their like stand-in person, but it gives them an opportunity to be able to say, okay, I want to, they ask me, how can I make a Black friend that's authentic? Or how can I do this? But it came as a result of reading these books and reading the history. That's the thing. People don't understand well, when we talk about critical race theory and these discussions right now, a lot of people would rather not have the discussion. But the people in this book club, and one time I think we had about 75 people, mostly white females, who wanted to talk about this. Very, very few white men. It was interesting. Very few white men, white females who wanted to have this discussion. And it's been sobering. It's been eye-opening when they've gone back and looked at the history and the origin of some of these things. It's been very, very meaningful for me. And so this Thursday night is where we're going to have a conversation on Talking with Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And so that's one of the things. It's LB Summer Book Club on Facebook. And so if people want to come and have her.
I have a great friend that's in your book club now, and she rages about it all the time. She's also a white woman, to your point, but she's also like a really just great thinker.
I mean, doesn't it take too much time to read these books for you?
Well, I try to make, one of the things I like to do is buy the book and buy the audio book, and at the same time do it. And so sometimes I will be doing some of my various activities and be listening to the audio book. And sometimes I'll put them on together, or if I'm in the plane, I'll be just reading the book or having it together. So there's always a time. And just like I learned in high school and college, that you can't do it all in one day. You have to kind of like plan it out. So little by little. And these books get so interesting. And my gosh, sometimes it's hard to turn the next page because it's so heartbreaking and just powerful. But I think people should do this because you learn so much, and it gives you a different perspective, and it gives you much more empathy and sympathy towards one another if you just can know about the experience and have the whole truth rather than parts of it.
I would recommend Malcolm's book. The audiobook is produced in a way that he has all the people he interviewed on. It's almost like a
Sandra
podcast.
Bland. Yeah, it's great.
Unbelievable.
It's
so
great.
Talking to Strangers is one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. So.
It's great. It's actual people. You hear Sandra Bland. You hear some of these other names where people are talking, and it's provocative, but also just like, it's great. Love it.
One of the interesting things is that anyone who says that opera just needs to be what I laughingly call Boviata, which is Bohème and Traviata put together, and everyone does those constantly. The single biggest show that we've had, we programmed with my opera company. A lot of people don't even know it existed, but Louis Armstrong and Dave Brubeck wrote a jazz opera called The Real Ambassadors. And a lot of people don't know it, but it's only been performed 3 different times. And one of the greatest things is that Louis Armstrong considered it one of the greatest pieces of work that he ever got to do in his entire life, and he was most proud of it. It's a weird kind of a hybrid thing that's kind of basically a jazz concept album that they put out, but it's been performed 3 times, and we were lucky enough because one of the pillars of our operatic community and the university in Springfield, Missouri, is Dr. Todd Payne, and he portrayed Louis Armstrong in Memphis in his hometown, and he's the one that brought it to my attention about 5 years ago. I said, "Hey, we've got to do this here in Springfield," and we looked at it and we were trying to figure out exactly when we could put it on. But the great thing is that we performed this back in March, and when we performed it, it's halfway in between opera and jazz. And the greatest thing is that we had our anyone who says that, well, opera goers will only come to see opera with traditionalists, they're all traditionalists. That's the biggest lie. It really takes programming, because this was the single most tickets that we've sold in, I don't know, maybe even in our entire history for one show. I just wanted to say that it really does take programming, and it takes needling and pushing the status quo, not a revolution and shoving it in people's faces. You have to be smart about how to make lasting change.
Since you both have experience in Europe, I have this sort of fantasy of Europe, these packed houses. Part of me thinks that maybe the idea of government support means that it's less able to change and flex and be interesting. Does performing in Europe feel like you're going back in time to some other sort of, is it like a whole different culture and a different discussion happening versus here? Because it really feels like opera's changing here. Do they care about the community the way American companies do?
Well, it's very different. Depending on where you are and which city, which region, which country, it's extremely diverse. And certain companies are more progressive than others, and certain regions are more traditionalists. But I will say that even, we all have this idea of like, and this romanticism of, oh, Europe, everyone loves opera and it's all packed houses. But I was Fest in Deutsche Oper Berlin about 13 years ago, and I honestly can't remember one show being even 3/4 full. But I was there for a year and a half, and it really just depends on the house. But there's this. Sometimes there's a government excess when they have a lot of money, and they don't have to reach out into communities. They don't have to do any of this kind of stuff. And this is one of the conversations that I'm constantly having with friends and other people that are around our age and are starting to take over opera companies, is that they've never even had to go out into the community and do anything for free for anyone, and to get a different group of people into the opera. They just haven't had to do that. Now it's changing because funding is changing everywhere. It started with the crash in 2008. You see more and more opera companies having to change the model slightly and work with tax incentives to give people money in the opera. It's still, to give you an idea, many of the companies, they work anywhere from 80 to 90% government funding, which would be the greatest godsend in the world in the United States. But our budget, I think, is 8%, something like that, maybe, and it's for very specific things. So it's mainly private ownership, and they really haven't had to do that in the past, to be honest. But now things are changing; they really are, and and yeah, you can see in certain areas they're really thinking about these things and going out into the communities. In France, for instance, many companies are doing these going out into communities and giving away culture and art, and they find it crucial to it. But other countries, for instance, I mentioned to them, so do you go out and perform for schools? And they're like, no. Well, that's a good idea. Maybe we should. And like, oh man, this is crazy. It's a different world, compared to what we have to do in the States. And I just think it's many parts of Europe. It's the exact opposite of the way that it is in the States. We're too dependent on private funding, and they're too dependent on government funding. There needs to be a balance.
Larry, what's your experience in Europe?
Well, the Europeans, it's interesting because if you go to Germany, you talk about some of their programming, it's crazy. Regie Theater is absolutely insane. And I've seen Planet of the Apes, Rigoletto. I've seen this abduction from the Seraglio in the Deutsche, the Komische Oper, where Osmin is completely naked and they're like have people in glass brooms performing sex acts on stage and all kinds of craziness. So they are pushing the envelope, and they're not traditionalists. They go as far as they can. I mean, there's this one famous Spanish stage director who does a lot of productions in Germany, and Regie Theater basically means that you can do whatever you want to. Yeah. This guy named Beato Calixto, he is known for just absolute. He would. No, I mean, this is not to disparage him, but like, for example, let's just say a stage director would have a main character come out and poop in the middle of the stage. I mean, as far as like, it's that type of provocative, just to shake you and rattle you. Meanwhile, you have the music of these, iconic performers that are composers that is in the background of what's happening. So this sense of traditional opera and the way that it has in Germany, they've gone off the map. Other places like Italy that consider themselves purist, anything that is far away from the traditional Panel production of the Aida or these other things, for them it's a scandal. It's just scandalous. And so it just depends on your history. It depends on your public, the people that are in your cities, because we don't have, again, if we want to go back to this discussion, we don't have, you don't have to go into the Black community because they don't have that Black community. They don't have the history of racism. They don't have that many Black people. And all those people are first generation that came from Africa. So are they reaching out to the Gypsies? Are they reaching out to the Romanians or the Albanians, which seem to be some of these countries where you see the mass deflections that they kind of settle into other places? The Turkish people, when you think about Germany, you have a huge Turkish community. You have large Arabic communities in some of these places. And so are they doing this groundwork to reach out to these people? I haven't seen as much, but as Michael said, because you have the government funding and you have some of these other things in places that they seem to, even if they don't have 100% capacity in some of these places, they have 75%, they have 60%. But, at the Metropolitan Opera not long ago, they were like 40% in some of the houses and stuff like that. I don't, with this discussion that people think, oh, opera's dying. I don't think so, because again, as Michael said, he was at Deutsche Oper Berlin. I just did a Sonambula there maybe a year or 2 years ago, and it was completely packed. And you go to Zurich and it's always packed. And you go to Munich and it's always packed. So in some cities, it is well attended. In some places, it's not. And that could be a number of different things. Maybe programming, maybe some of the artists, maybe marketing, maybe these other things. But it's hard to kind of like nail it down to being just, Europe as a whole, because there's so many different things and factors why you may see the bigger crowds or smaller crowds or less diverse populations.
So the opera where the guy pooped on the stage, let's say, is that a 40% house or 80% house? Usually
those are like 80% houses.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Because they want to see the scandal. So a friend of mine, she's an American, she showed me a videotape of this abduction from the Seraglio, from the Komische Oper. She told me, because she was there for many years, she said, every time they put that production on, and they do it all the time, you can't get a ticket because people know and they want to come and boo. It's just like, boo. I mean, they lose their minds booing, but they want to see the scandals. And so that is the essence of what that production presents.
You know, it makes me wonder, like, about the audience composition, though, right? Because it's like here we talk about things that are like living or dying based on the audience composition. So it just makes me wonder, like, are they programming for a diverse audience and giving the people what they want versus giving the people what they want versus programming for a limited audience and giving those people what they want rather than the people, if that makes sense?
The interesting thing for me is that goes back to when you don't have to work for your money and you don't and you actually get a large excess of it, and you have to spend it in order to get it. You can do these crazy things and not worry. And I've actually heard intendants saying, very important people saying, I don't care about the public. My job is to create art. I don't care how many people are there in the seats. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing. I mean, that's insane. That's another world. But this is, because they get their government funding, and that would never be possible. And yeah, it is only for a specific group of people, and that's why. But this is why I love opera so much. Is in Europe, there's so much history behind it, and it can still. It can still be like a football match, and you can still. I mean, people in Parma still bring tomatoes to operas, and if they don't like it, they'll tell you. People don't realize this. I mean, that's if you're not just respecting the tradition, they're gonna try and get you. So I mean, that's why it's this living, breathing thing, and this is we have it. We are creating that actively now in the States, but we have this nostalgia of thinking, oh, well, if everyone was like they were in Europe, the world would be better. It's like, no. Opera is just this emerging, evolving, incredible art form, and we need to be proud and realize that we're all part of it. We're all part of this evolving thing that we can shape and define what opera is. It's not just what it was in the history books, and most people don't even know the history of it, because if they did, they would be scared out of their pants. Because what opera is supposed to be out of the actual word, and I tell everyone about this, is that the word opera is a made-up word. It was taken from the old Latinate of lavoro, to operate, and to a work of art. People would say to work, but it also meant, as a double entendre, completely made up in Italian, to a work to change within society, to change the society. A lot of people don't realize that the Renaissance happened as a big result because of opera. Opera was going in and changing things within society, and a lot of people don't like to admit a lot of these social issues that are within the opera. And people say, well, that's sexist, that's racist. And it's like, the reason they put it in there is to put a mirror in front of you and make you go, ooh, that's too far. I don't like that feeling. Like, yes, this is what opera is supposed to do to you. It's supposed to evoke change within society and within yourself. That's what opera does. And as Larry said, there's this asinine theory that, well, opera's dying. That's just someone who's just a narcissist that believes that in post-apocalyptic ideas, and it kills me. Deconstructionism, I hate it.
I like to say opera's died a million times,
Bravo.
And come back to life a million times.
Yeah.
I was like, probably died to certain people and lives and is resurrected for others.
Bravo.
Yeah, but also Baroque opera. Baroque opera died. It died, right? It's not the same thing.
Exactly. That's why I have a friend in France. He wants to create a publication, and he loves the idea of the opéra est mort et vive l'opéra.
Yes.
So opera's dead, and long live opera. And that's what we're talking about. It's a great. This is what it is. It's this constant rebirth and evolution and revolution. That's what the opera is and should be. It comes from the very etymology of the word, and we need to keep that at the forefront.
Well, this has been a great discussion, guys. It's been really an honor to have you both on. It's rare that we really just focus on singers. We've been very composer oriented, and it's just amazing to have two singers of your caliber on the show at the same time. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and for listening to the podcast. And I hope you guys, we have a great fall. I'm really looking forward to some live production happening again. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, and we look forward to seeing. Hopefully, you all come out and see Larry and I at the 92nd Street Y, because we're going to put on a show. We promise you that. You might not like it, but we're going to put on a show.
I will be there. Actually, yes.
Oh, great!
Awesome.
I'll look for you.
Yeah, look for it.
And if our audience wants to know more about you, where should they head?
About us, I guess individually, I'm Lawrence. I think I'm lawrenceBrownlee.com or it's bari-tenor.com, one of those two. And of course, Brownlee Tenor on Instagram and Facebook. And I like to be silly and have fun on my Instagram. So if people are interested in knowing who I am, come follow me. But also go to the 92nd Street Y if you're in New York or Baltimore, DC, or one of these other areas, Philadelphia, close by. We will definitely try to make it worth your while in coming to the concert on October the 27th. So please do come.
Great.
And Michael, where can they find more of you?
You're like J.D. Salinger. I stay away from everyone. No, michaelspyres.com, and of course Facebook, like Larry had said. But yeah, we're just so excited to bring our message of brotherhood and friendship, and I call him my bel canto brother, to audiences worldwide, and in our own way, we just are hoping to advocate for the flourishing of opera and the changing of society, and this is what we're all trying to do here.
Great. And anyone who wants to know more, we'll put links to their personal sites and social media on our website, so you can reach out to them. Also, I encourage you to just search YouTube, because there's a lot of stuff of both of you guys. And I must say, Michael, you singing opera in cafes and outside in public. I saw one thing where you just start singing Nessun Dorma, and only the money note, right? Only the one great phrase.
Of course.
And scaring the hell out of people in the cafe. It's just wonderful. So
I want to see an aria with a jackhammer.
Yeah.
Jackhammer.
Well, that's literally how I started to get good. I would go out there, and I was a lawn care specialist, and I would be mowing while listening to and trying out all these without people not even realizing that they weren't hearing anything. They were just hearing the lawnmower. So I could mess up as much as I wanted.
That's great.
No one told you to shut up, right?
Yeah, it was great.
Amazing.
All right, thanks, guys. And it was really been a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks. Ciao.
Thank you.
Nice to be with you all.
Bye.
Thanks. Break a leg.
We hope you enjoyed our show. Please give us a thumbs up, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel or audio podcast feed on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback of any kind, please let us know by emailing us at comments@indieopera.com. Help us to make the future of opera brighter and bolder with a tax-deductible gift today. Donate to the Indie Opera Podcast on our website, Facebook, or on Patreon for special benefits. This episode of the Indie Opera Podcast was recorded on Zoom with co-hosts Walker Lewis, Peter Zepp, Ashley Renee Watkins, and our special guests Lawrence Brownlee and Michael Spyres. Our show is created with the support of Business and Operations Manager Brooke Larimer, Associate Producer Chuck Sachs, Jonathan Blaylock, PR Consultant, Gregory Mumji, Web Correspondent, and Rosha Krian, who created our theme music. This episode was edited by Peter Zepp. Thank you for watching.